What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 38 of the Block Exploring podcast. With me is Tommy, as always. And as always, this podcast is not financial advice. So if you're looking for that, this is not the place. Let's get into it. This week, the state of the market, well, it's been a recovery. I think Bitcoin has kind of climbed back to the 50,000 euro mark. ETH also recovered up 8% this week. Same thing for Binance and a lot of other, larger projects. I think the top 10 overall is down in the negative, but the larger, like top 3, top 5 projects are in the plus. Cardano is still down, unfortunately. And Avalanche has actually been booming for the past 2 days, which is pretty nice. So yeah, let's get into it. Overall, fairly bullish market, I'd say. I think the recovery has definitely kind of inspired a bit more confidence with the average investor. And so this week we're going to talk to you about everything that happened in the crypto space. Mainly, we're going to talk to you about the Ethereum drama that happened, the ramifications stemming from it, and we're going to discuss who to trust in the crypto space a bit. Then we're going to discuss fractional ownerships in the NFT space and in the DAO space. And then we'd like to know what you guys think. So, Tommy, let's get into it.
Let's do
Recent
it.
Ethereum drama. What
Yes.
happened?
So this was around last week. Yeah, there was a madness on Twitter. It all really started from Suzu, one of the partners at Three Arrows Capital, one of the bigger and more well-known crypto investment funds. He essentially tweeted out that he's abandoning Ethereum because Ethereum is abandoning its users by always employing the purity test on decentralization and that. And it's pretty harsh criticism. He even went on to say that it's gross that new users are priced out of Ethereum, and of course that kicked off a whole storm. It didn't actually move the market in general. I don't think it did, but it might
Hmm.
have. But because I think
No, I
Ethereum
think
was
it
on
was a
a
bit of a contained explosion, you know?
yeah drawback anyway. But
Yeah.
yeah, basically ETH peeps came out, and vehemently defended decentralization as king. And yeah, this was a whole drama for a moment. People were going back and forth, but it really just touches on this debate about decentralization, gas fees, L1 solutions, L2 well L1 chains, L2 solutions, and people have loads of opinions about it. But thankfully for those who are ETH holders anyway, ETH2 devs have recently announced that they are inviting the community to come test out the merge, which is huge news for Ethereans. And yeah, because the merge is what a lot of people have been waiting for. It's what's going to move Ethereum from proof of work to proof of stake,
Hmm.
and yeah, that's extremely bullish and would solve a lot of these ETH gas fees.
Fair. Fair
Yeah,
game. Yeah, I wasn't as, I actually barely noticed the ETH drama. I had a bit of a busy week.
sure.
And I saw someone tweet, why are we all hating it? Why is Ethereum the most hated cryptocurrency on crypto Twitter right now? That's all I saw from it. I
So
was like, oh,
funny.
what's going on?
Yeah,
But yeah. And what do you think kind of the ramifications of this
I
are?
think.
Do you think the guy had a point that, the
Well,
gas fee ecosystem has been critiqued?
he definitely has a point. I mean, I don't think anyone denies that he has a point, but we also have to look at who is making this critique. Suzu is an investor. That's what Three Arrows Capital does. They invest in a
Hmm.
big way. They move markets. That they have that kind of capital, and I don't think it's a huge jump to think that Suzu knows that himself that he is a mover, a shaker, and whatever he says travels and actually
Hmm.
impacts the market. So it's not a stretch to imagine that he might be pumping bags or he genuinely cares about gas fees for users. But
Yeah.
I think it just depends on where do you stand on this debate about giving a giving a little bit in the way of decentralization for less gas fees. And in my in from my understanding, the ETH community is just will not compromise on decentralization, and that's the hill they decide to die upon, and that's what, why people like and use and Ethereum in the first place. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely valid criticism that the network is so congested now, which is a good problem to have. Yeah, it does price out newer users, but it's hard. There's so many angles to it.
Mm-hmm.
What do you
No, that's
think?
true. I don't know. I've read a bunch about the way
Mm-hmm.
that gas fees really price people out of the market, out of just using it. It really is, uh, in a way, a new form of transaction fees. So like you flee transaction fees from banks just to get back to transaction fees on ETH. And of course, you need to
Yeah.
incentivize somehow. But the ETH price has skyrocketed so much, compared to the dollar, of course, in the
Mm-hmm.
past years, that the gas fees, which are calculated in Gwei, relatively are extremely high and extremely pricey for a lot of people. I think
Mm-hmm.
if you want true mass adoption, you need to tackle that in a way. And it might also add to decentralization, because I think what it incentivizes now is to let very large players become ETH miners, or very bundled capital sources invest and become ETH miners or validators.
Mm-hmm.
And if you make those rewards lower, maybe the pool of, or not pool, the amount of validators on the network, or the amount of miners on the network right now, it will diversify that a bit, because it won't be as interesting of an investment for the larger players. So I think maybe that could have positive effects, allowing for a more accessible ecosystem and lower transaction fees, because they can be influenced. It's not like transactions fees are, they don't have to be that high. It's just because the validators charge this high.
Well, but that's not this decision of the validator. They don't choose to set the
Hmm.
price of per transaction. That's just calculated through network congestion and how much, you know if there's only so much block space, and if you do what a lot of these other L1s are doing to,
Hmm.
scale on L1 as opposed to doing something like scale on an L2, is increasing throughput on the blockchain,
Yeah.
which, at a point it becomes unsustainable, because what a blockchain should do is reach consensus, and if you have too much data for these nodes to reach consensus, then you have a problem. Then your chain is insecure, it breaks down,
Hmm.
right? And that's what Ethereum doesn't compromise on. It doesn't compromise on how much data can go on per block, right? And that's why
Yeah.
gas fees are expensive, but that's also why the move to proof of stake, that creates all these shard chains, which allows
Hmm.
for gas fees to be solved in that way. I mean, I think that people are just taking two different solutions to
Hmm.
this problem, right? Two different
Yeah.
issues. So whereas others would choose to scale the L1, right? And by doing so, they increase the throughput. But then
Hmm.
obviously you compromise on decentralization and consent and the ability to reach consensus. You have a much less secure chain, right? So
Yeah.
I think so. In my view, Ethereans don't choose to not compromise on decentralization, because if you're moving a lot of money, you want nothing less than the most secure chain, right? Hence why the solution for Ethereum, because Ethereans don't think to scale the L1. The move
Hmm.
to the ETH v2 is already like the scaling of L1, but the further solution is, which is what everyone agrees. I mean, everyone in the community, I think, agrees with, is that L2 is where most transaction activity will happen. But
Hmm.
that works well for what Ethereans want, right? They want the decentralization, they want the security, but yeah, so they also don't like high gas fees, so they want both, right? So that's why an L2 solution or world is kind of how I view the direction we're going with, or
Yeah. For me,
you know,
it's really, well, for me, my main use of ETH is to pay for gas fees for
sure.
transactions whenever I try to stake something, or I try to move something into a DeFi project.
Hmm.
But I think, in a way, sure, Ethereum is very secure. That's really good. What I like more is projects that support multi-chain features. So there
Yeah.
are projects that allow you
True.
to move the same assets just via a wrapped version over another chain or
Yeah.
whatever. And then you save a lot, and then that makes it more accessible. So I do think that
True.
there's a very good point in wanting this very decentralized, very secure way of doing
Hmm.
transaction and not making it cheap. But then,
But it's not. It's not about. It's not like they don't want it to be. It's not like they don't want it to not be cheap. Do you know what I
no, but
mean?
it's the sacrifice they're most willing to make. You know, that we make it more
Well,
expensive and keep it
exactly.
more secure. So I think that
Well,
the positive aspect of this is you incentivize projects to decentralize to an even further degree, right? You
yeah.
say, hey, don't just focus on Ethereum, focus on a lot of these chains that exist and allow for
Yeah.
transactions to interact here as well. And that I think is true decentralization.
Yeah, there's a reason why but there, well, decentralization, how that decentralization of how that project, takes brings in users.
Hmm.
But decentralization in terms of the blockchain, I mean, that's a different thing. But there's a
Yeah,
reason why these projects start off with ETH, right? I think most projects ultimately in their roadmap, they do include like a multi-chain future, but
yeah,
there's a reason why they start with Ethereum because, let's say, okay, let's say you have a project, right? A staking service, right? It's on Ethereum, it's on Avax, right? There's one is clearly the more secure chain, and one is, the cheaper chain, right?
yeah.
Ultimately, like, if you're making your money with this service on Avax, for example, you've been operating on Avax, and that you're going to want to store that money in Ethereum for
Hmm.
on a long-term basis because it's the more secure chain. You're not The likelihood that Ethereum shuts down is far less than the likelihood that Avax just shuts down, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
like, I think but that shows you the two very, like, different purposes and why all these two will exist, because one is security focused, and one
hmm,
is, you know socially focused, and both can exist, but they both, so, like, I think the dilemma comes in when people want one thing to do both, while when
yeah,
that really doesn't need to happen because they're trying to do two different things.
yeah. That's what I'm saying. I
Yeah.
think a lot of well, we talked about it. I think it was very early into the podcast. It was like episode 4 or 5. We were talking about maximalism, and
Oh, yeah.
this is like a similar argument you hear from a lot of Bitcoin
Hmm.
maxis that say like, "Oh, Bitcoin will solve it all
Yeah.
eventually." But I think that in a way, it's another version of centralization, right? This maximalism, this very single chain oriented way of approaching cryptocurrencies.
Hmm.
I think it's that in a way is also centralized because sure, if this like let's say an EIP comes through,
Hmm.
that's the majority of the votes went in favor of a proposal, right?
Yeah.
And in a way, if you decide, hey, I don't agree with this, you should have the option to take another chain to have an alternative to Ethereum. I think that's the entire purpose to this space.
Hmm. Yeah,
And I
for sure.
think
I mean,
that's
true.
what people oversee. That's where a lot of the complaints about Ethereum and about gas fees stem from. And that's why I mean personally I find the gas fees on Ethereum too high to be very
But that's
relevant to
for
me. I
now.
use it sometimes,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's for now. But that's why I opt to use
Yeah.
once in a while. I use the Binance Smart Chain, even though I don't really like it. I use
Yeah.
it. That's why I use Avax sometimes. That's why I sometimes use Solana.
Hmm.
It is what it is, but there are options. They are out there, and I think you
Yeah,
shouldn't
exactly.
focus too much on just what goes on with ETH. You know, I don't think ETH
Mhm.
is the end, is the pinnacle of crypto. Maybe in five
No, it's
years,
not.
ETH will be like irrelevant. Who knows?
Maybe not, but
Yeah,
but I don't think it's because I that's where the debate is, right? So people are only debating this chain versus that chain in a way,
yeah.
in on like on principle and technicalities, right? As opposed, because I think for most people they're using everything they
Yeah.
can. You know what I'm saying? There's just, like, people on ETH probably using Solana as well, probably using Avax,
Mm-hmm.
probably using Binance, right? They're using it all. Like, what we see on Twitter is just the debate where where people are debating these bigger issues like decentralization, compromising on this, L1s versus L2 solutions, like, but the reality is that people actually use everything, and we're just looking at a small, it's just because someone says like, um, just because someone says other L1 solutions are inferior to ETH, for example, in regards to decentralization, because it's probably true, doesn't mean they're not going to use that chain, right? Or that they dislike that chain necessarily, like to the point where they're going to not use it, right? Because there's value created on all chains for the most part. It's just about a little, I mean, not little things, but these are small siloed debates that we explode, I think,
Yeah,
you know.
I
For
think
example,
I think that's.
that person making the comment about ETH being uh decentrally superior, for example, to other L1s.
Hmm.
I think it doesn't make him a maximalist necessarily, because he or she, whoever, is holding multiple bags in it.
Yeah,
Probably so, by nature, he's probably not a maximalist, right? If you're holding
yeah.
multiple bags.
Exactly. And I think with that we can kind of wrap up this episode. I think
Yeah.
the entire crypto space has been built on wanting an alternative from things like financial
Sure.
markets, from centralized governance. And I think within the crypto space, you should think that way. So
Mm-hmm.
always think in alternatives, always look for alternatives. If you don't like
Sure.
a project, look into another project, build another project.
Mm-hmm.
And with that being said, build with us on this podcast, join our
Yeah.
Discord, tune in next week, and we'll see you then. Peace.
Take it easy.